This is Socrates, the most famous philosopher maybe ever. He lived in ancient Greece, specifically the city of Athens, around 450 BC. Athens was a democracy. A little different from American democracy as we know it, but the basic idea was the same. Rule by the people. Sounds like a great place to be a philosopher, right? This is Plato. Plato was Socrates' student. He was so dedicated to Socrates that he followed him around, writing down his conversations with the supposedly wise men of Athens, recording them as his famous dialogues, which are still studied in colleges and universities to this day. Indeed, the writing of Plato formed the core of the entire Western intellectual tradition. I should mention, he was also the teacher of Aristotle. There are traces of Plato's ideas to be found in virtually all philosophy, science, and intellectual inquiry that has emerged since classical times. There is some debate about how much of what appears in the dialogues is in fact Socrates' words, and how much is Plato's invention, but for the sake of this class, it really doesn't make a difference. We can refer to them more or less synonymously. What's not in dispute is that Socrates pissed people off, specifically the rich and the powerful. He spent his life living in poverty, walking around the city, and having discussions with the supposedly wise, who in ancient Athens were often confused with the powerful. In these discussions, his purpose was to prove that they were actually ignorant, that they didn't know anything. Naturally, they resented him for this, and they sought to punish him for his audacity. Why did Socrates believe that these great men were wise? The answer can be found in his central philosophical theory, the theory of forms. This is a bit of a mind bender, so pay attention. Here we have a chair. But Socrates asks, how do we know that it is a chair? I mean, there are all kinds of chairs, and they all look different, right? Sometimes they even function differently. This one swivels. This one is fixed. This one has straight lines. This one is round. All chairs must have some fundamental attribute in common if we are to identify them all as chairs. Well, here's Socrates' answer to this puzzle. Here are some chairs. We have our dinner chair, our swivel office chair, even a lazy boy recliner for good measure, and all other chairs you can imagine. Despite their differences, we recognize them all as chairs because they are participating in the form of chair, a perfect, complete chair that contains all possible chairs within it. I'll come back to this point in a bit. All particular chairs that exist in the tangible world are merely emanations, imperfect copies. An appropriate metaphor would be shadows of that perfect version of chair that exists in the realm of forms. And there are forms of everything, tables, tools, buildings, you name it, there's a form for it. In this sense, it is technically not correct to call particular chairs chairs at all. It is more appropriate to say that they participate in the form of chair, or that they have chairness, the qualities associated with the chair. Somehow, Socrates believed we had some knowledge of these forms without actually being able to see them. Otherwise, he reasoned, how would we recognize particulars in the tangible world? We are able to do this, he contends, because we remember having perceived the forms in the time before our mortal life, when unfettered by human limitations we had direct access to the forms. And this, by the way, is Socrates' argument for the immortality of the soul. Now, it's important to note that the concept of forms did not only apply to physical objects, but to abstract concepts as well. Goodness, truth, justice, all these concepts are only known to us if we can perceive their forms. By the way, up here is something called the form of good. Ask me about this in class. Anyway, since we can't perceive the forms of these abstract concepts, but can only dimly remember them, it is no surprise that we get them wrong so often. Take justice. A judge that could perceive the form of justice would always make the right ruling, but we've never seen such a person. Still, Socrates argued, all acts of justice, whether right or not, attempt to participate in the form of justice, and so should not be contradicted. Now, let's look at the concept of wisdom. If there is a form of wisdom, then the truly wise man would not know about the particulars of daily life, but would know about the form of wisdom. So this supposedly wise man, who knows how to practice medicine without realizing that he is merely participating in the form of medicine, is more lucky than wise. And so too with all supposedly wise men. The point is, in Socrates' view, all these great men of Athens knew nothing. They may have some practical ability in certain fields, but their inability to see the connections between what were in their view distinct things always necessarily limited their expertise. Naturally, as in any society, someone who pisses off the powerful is going to find themselves in trouble, and of course Socrates earned their wrath, though he did not think he deserved it. The powerful of Athens concocted a story that Socrates was corrupting the youth, and used this as a pretext to prosecute him and sentence him to death. He protested, but ultimately they carried out the sentence, and Socrates was executed by poison. Now, here's you thinking, I think I get it, but I'm still a little confused. Not unusual at all. The theory of forms can be a tough thing to wrap your head around. Watch this YouTube clip about Plato's allegory of the cave to better understand, and ask any questions that you have in class on Wednesday. Oops, I think the baby's being born.